The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, a cold soundtrack to the slow drip of the IV beside her. Layla Thompson lay motionless on the hospital bed, her legs still trembling from the hours-long labor that had brought her daughter into the world alone. Her palms were dry, pressed tightly to the hospital blanket, her mind spinning not from the pain, but from the silence, his silence. No call, no message, no one in the waiting room. The nurse had asked 3 times if Layla had someone she could contact. Each time, Layla shook her head slowly. She wasn't sure anymore. The door finally swung open at 7:34 p.m., and for a fleeting second hope returned. Then it shattered. Jonah stood there, but he wasn't alone. His arm was looped around a tall woman in a tailored white coat, her blonde hair falling in perfect waves. She smiled like she'd walked into a business meeting, not a maternity ward. "Layla," Jonah said with no warmth, just a rehearsed pause. "We need to talk." Layla stared at them both, the ache in her body eclipsed only by the dull roar building in her chest. The woman stepped forward without waiting for an invitation. "I'm Riley," she said, her voice light as air. "Jonah's partner." Layla looked at Jonah. He didn't correct her, didn't apologize, didn't flinch. It was all real. "I thought we were past this, Layla," he said, shifting his weight as if the room were too small. "We haven't been working for a while, and this changes nothing. Riley and I, we're building a future." A deep laugh escaped her, dry and cracked. "You mean, while I was in labor carrying your child, you were planning a new future?" Jonah sighed, annoyed, as if she was the one being unreasonable. "You always make things dramatic. Look, it's better this way. You'll get the support you need. I'll move on, and Riley's already helping with everything." "You mean she's replacing me?" "She's here, isn't she?" he snapped. Layla slowly reached over to the drawer beside her bed. Her hand trembled only slightly, not from fear, but from long-held resolve. She pulled out a thin manila folder and placed it on the side table, with quiet certainty. Inside were the divorce papers, signed, filled out, waiting only for Jonah's name. "I've had this ready for months," she said softly, staring directly into his eyes. "I was just waiting for the right reason." For the first time, Jonah looked unsettled. His bravado slipped just a bit. Riley crossed her arms. "Well, at least you're being reasonable." Layla didn't answer. She didn't have to. The silence said more than tears or anger ever could. She was done playing small in a life that had only ever shrunk her. As Jonah reached for the folder, Layla added, "I hope she takes good care of you. You'll need it." They turned to leave without another word. No one asked to see the baby. No one offered a goodbye. The moment the door clicked shut, Layla exhaled deeply. For the first time in years, she felt the ground shift beneath her, not from collapse, but from rebirth. She turned to look at the bassinet beside her. Her daughter was sleeping peacefully, unaware of the storm that had passed through the room. She reached over, gently stroked the baby's cheek, and whispered, "You're never going to feel what I did. Not for a second." Jonah had no idea about the inheritance. No idea that Layla now controlled over $10 million in property, gifted to her from a grandmother he barely knew existed. No idea that Riley, so poised and smug, was actually on Layla's payroll at a firm she had recently acquired through a silent partnership. Layla smiled faintly to herself. He thought he walked away with the upper hand. But the truth, she hadn't even played her full hand yet. The rain hadn't stopped for 2 days, washing the windows of Layla's apartment in soft gray streaks. She sat by the heater, sipping weak chamomile tea from a chipped mug, her daughter asleep in a woven bassinet beside her. Her phone buzzed with a message from her mother, simple, curious, and life-altering. "Call me when you can. It's about the cabin." She called immediately. Her mother's voice came through with warmth and something else, urgency. "Sweetheart, do you remember the old property your grandmother left up near Claremont?" Layla blinked. "The one with the broken-down porch and wild blackberry bushes." "Yes, that one. But it's not just a cabin anymore. The whole area's been developed. Resorts, private trails, lakeside rentals. I had it appraised last week." Layla sat up straighter. "You had it? What?" Her mother's tone dropped. "Layla, it's worth over $7 million. And the city apartment she bought in your name, that's another 2. The room stilled. 7 plus 2. Her chest rose slowly as if her lungs had forgotten how to breathe. She looked around the small space she had rented, post-discharge walls. Still bare dishes, still borrowed. For years, she had lived like a woman scraping by, and yet her name sat on assets that could buy back every ounce of lost dignity. "Why didn't you tell me?" before she whispered. Her mother sighed. "Because you loved Jonah, and I didn't want him near a dime of it." Layla's fingers tightened around the mug. She thought of Jonah's cold eyes, the hospital hallway, Riley's smug little smile. And suddenly it all made sense. She hadn't just been discarded. She'd been overlooked. Because she made it too easy to be invisible. Not anymore. "I'm going to call a lawyer," she said aloud. That night, when the baby was fed and asleep, Layla reached for her laptop. The keys felt foreign under her fingertips, like tools she had forgotten she could wield. She typed in a name, Cassandra Lane, family law attorney, a classmate from her undergrad days in Iowa, now a known figure in Portland's legal circuit. Sharp, discreet, relentless. By morning, Layla had retained Cassandra with a quiet email. By noon, they were on a call. "You sure about this?" Cassandra asked. "Yes," Layla answered, her voice steady. "I'm not staying silent anymore. I want the divorce filed on my terms, and I want full control of my assets." Over the next week, Layla met with appraisers, bankers, and estate advisors. She moved her accounts out of joint control and placed Riley's employer unknown to Riley, under a new holding company bearing Layla's name. Every document signed was a seed of control, quietly planted in her favor. Jonah still didn't suspect a thing. He was too busy building a fantasy life with Riley, too sure that Layla would fade out quietly, like some sad footnote. He didn't know about the corporate restructuring. He didn't know the downtown building where Riley worked was now leased from Layla's shell company. He didn't know that every dollar he was spending from their joint account had already been flagged for financial review. She watched him from a distance now, not in jealousy, but in strategy. For so long, Layla had thought strength came from surviving. Now she understood real strength came from reclaiming what was hers, what had been buried under years of silence and sacrifice. She wasn't just preparing to leave Jonah. She was preparing to rise brick by legal brick. And he had no idea the reckoning was coming, wrapped not in rage, but in quiet, deliberate power. The white noise of the hospital was oddly soothing monitors, humming footsteps muffled behind curtains, a distant beep from another room. Layla blinked slowly at the ceiling tiles above her bed. Her ribs ached with every breath, and the neck brace pinched just beneath her jaw. The crash had come out of nowhere. A sharp turn, a truck's sudden stop, then chaos. She remembered the blur of metal, the impact, and the scent of burnt rubber. Now here she was 2 days post-accident, alone, stitched and sore. No Jonah. No flowers, no texts, not even a missed call. The nurse came by that morning and gently asked if she wanted to notify anyone about her condition. Layla had simply shaken her head, too tired to explain that the man who should have been by her side had probably already moved on in every way that mattered. So when the door creaked open just after lunch, and she heard the unmistakable cadence of leather soles and perfume, she knew before she even looked. Jonah and Riley. Layla turned her head slowly, wincing from the strain. Jonah walked in like a man delivering a casual update, not like someone who had abandoned his wife at the worst moment of her life. "You look better than I expected," he said flatly. Riley stood beside him in a pencil skirt and blazer arms, folded eyes scanning the machines like she was analyzing an office floor plan. "We didn't want to wait too long," she added. "We have things to sort out." Layla's throat tightened. She felt no rage, no panic, just a strange kind of stillness, like a calm before a long-awaited storm. "Sort out," she echoed softly. Jonah nodded, stepping closer to her bed. "I figured since you're resting here, it's a good time to talk next steps. Riley and I are planning to move forward. You deserve closure. So let's make this clean. Closure. As if marriage could be folded up like a worn-out contract and placed in a filing cabinet." Riley spoke next, voice soft, but clipped. "We've already looked into mediation options. Jonah doesn't want a messy split. Neither do I. We just want peace." Peace. Layla let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "You came to my hospital room to offer me peace." Jonah sighed. "This doesn't have to be emotional, Layla. We're adults." That word stung more than anything else. Adults. As if she were the one being childish for expecting decency, for expecting her husband to stand beside her after a car crash, for expecting love. But this wasn't a time for emotion. It was a time for revelation. With a calm hand, Layla reached toward the drawer by her bedside and pulled out a beige folder. She placed it on the table beside her IV line. "What's that?" Jonah asked, his voice halting for the first time. "Divorce papers," she said, clear and measured. "Prepared weeks ago. Signed on my end. All it needs is your name." Riley blinked. "You already—" Layla looked her dead in the eyes. "You thought I was clinging, but I was just observing." Jonah opened the folder, scanning the pages. His brow furrowed when he saw the dates. This wasn't a reaction. This was a plan. A plan that had started long before they showed their hand. "You were going to leave me," he said quietly. Layla nodded. "I was just waiting for a moment that made it easy to forget I ever loved you." Riley moved to speak, but Layla raised a hand. "Save it. This isn't about either of you. Not anymore." Jonah's lips parted, but no words came. The silence in the room was thick, final. Layla leaned back against the pillows, suddenly exhausted, but not from pain. From release. She had handed him the exit. But what he didn't know was that he'd just walked away from a woman with all the cards, all the leverage, all the power. The morning after Jonah left her hospital room, Layla's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Missed calls one after the other, all from him. She let the screen light up and go dark again and again, like a ticking clock. There was no voicemail, no apology, just urgency, the kind born from fear, not remorse. By the fifth call, she picked up. "Layla, why was my divorce petition denied?" he barked. "The clerk said there's a block on it. Something about a legal challenge. What the hell are you doing?" She held the phone away from her face, took a calm breath, and answered. "It's called a counter motion. I filed it 2 weeks ago through my attorney." You might want to read the paperwork before you start assuming control again. Jonah's voice cracked with irritation. What counter motion? We haven't even discussed terms. Exactly, she interrupted. And until we do, nothing gets approved. Silence pulsed on the line. Then he spoke lower now, trying to steady his tone. You don't need to drag this out. We can be civil. Let's just get it done quickly, Civil Layla repeated with a bitter smile. You walked into my hospital room with another woman and told me to move on. And now you want civil because things aren't going your way. I was trying to do the decent thing, he argued. She almost laughed. Decent left this conversation when you walked away from your own wife in a neck brace. That ended the call, or so she thought. Within hours, her phone lit up with texts, Jonah again. I can't access the checking account. Did you freeze it? What happened to the joint savings? My card's getting declined. Layla, answer me. What did you do with the money? She leaned back against the cushions of her small apartment couch, scrolling through each frantic message with measured satisfaction. The truth was simple. She had followed Cassandra's guidance to the letter. Days before the accident, Layla had transferred her half of the joint assets into a trust under her name and frozen the accounts under suspicion of misuse, just in case Jonah tried something reckless. Turns out, just in case had been spot on. By noon, she received a call from their bank manager confirming Jonah had attempted to withdraw several $1,000s using a secondary card that was no longer active. Do you want us to alert him about the freeze, Ms. Thompson? The manager asked politely. No, Layla said evenly. He'll figure it out. She wasn't playing games. This was her life finally under her control. And Jonah, who had always believed her too soft, too dependent, was now standing on a rug she had quietly pulled out from under him. The next day, Jonah showed up at her apartment door, suit-wrinkled jaw, clenched eyes darting behind her like he was still searching for some trace of his former dominance. You can't just lock me out of everything, he said. Layla crossed her arms, calm. That's where you're wrong. I've done exactly that. This isn't what I expected from you, he snapped. She stepped forward, her voice unwavering. And that's your mistake. You never saw who I really was, because you never cared to look. He tried to soften. Layla, let's not fight. There's no fight, she said simply. There's just paperwork signatures, and the reality you can't undo. Jonah looked at her like he was seeing a stranger, and maybe he was. The woman in front of him didn't flinch, didn't beg, didn't retreat, because she had already left him, emotionally, financially, and most importantly, mentally. The power had shifted, and Layla wasn't giving it back. The knock at the door came just after 9 a.m. 3 short raps followed by silence. Layla opened it slowly, expecting the courier or a neighbor. Instead, she froze. Allison, she breathed. Her best friend from college stood on the doorstep, suitcase in one hand, a paper coffee cup in the other. Her eyes scanned Layla's face with concern. You look like hell, she said without a smile. I came as soon as I heard. Layla stepped aside, tears stinging the corners of her eyes. You flew in from Denver. Allison dropped her bag and pulled her into a hug. Of course I did. You think I'd let my sister go through all this alone? They talked for hours. Layla told her everything: Jonah, the hospital betrayal, the blocked divorce, the frozen accounts. She spoke without dramatics, without pity, just facts. But it wasn't until Allison put her coffee down that the real bomb dropped. So, about Riley. Layla frowned. What about her Riley Donovan? That's her last name, right? Layla nodded cautiously. Allison pulled out her phone and started scrolling. Her aunt Marianne Donovan used to be in my women's investment circle. Real estate. The woman couldn't stop complaining about her niece. Said she bounced from one older man to another, always with some angle. Layla sat up straighter. You're saying Riley targeted Jonah. I'm saying she's done it before. Her aunt said she once faked a pregnancy to get a pediatrician to marry her. When he found out, he left her, and she drained his savings before he could file a claim. Layla blinked slowly. That's insane. Allison handed her the phone. On the screen was a group photo from a holiday charity event. There was Riley clear as day, standing next to Marianne, smiling like she had nothing to hide. I've been asking around, Allison added. Riley has a reputation. She picks men who look financially stable and pretends to be exactly what they want. Then when she's secure, she starts the real manipulation. Layla was quiet, absorbing the full weight of the revelation. Everything began to click. Riley's sudden confidence, her rush to finalize the divorce, her refusal to acknowledge Layla even in the hospital. She was playing Jonah like a game, and Jonah, blinded by ego and fantasy, had walked straight into her trap. We need proof, Layla said, standing. Allison was ready. Already started. Marianne agreed to speak to your lawyer. She's embarrassed, wants to distance herself from her niece. And if Jonah won't believe words, I've got something better. She opened an envelope she'd pulled from her tote. Inside were high-resolution photos, Riley entering a luxury hotel, with another man definitely not Jonah. Then another image, Riley sitting in a bar, whispering into yet another man's ear. Different nights. Different men. She's been playing everyone, Allison said. And now, she's about to get played. Later that evening, Cassandra, Layla's attorney, reviewed the evidence. Her lips curved slightly. If we introduce this at the mediation table, Riley's credibility is toast. And if Jonah tries to contest anything, this will tank him too. Layla stared at the photos for a long time. Good. I don't want revenge. I want truth. Let him see what he traded me for. 2 days later, Cassandra scheduled a private legal meeting with both parties. Allison made one last call to Marianne Donovan. The aunt agreed to appear and verify the story. Layla didn't flinch. She didn't need to humiliate anyone. She just needed the mask to come off. Jonah had underestimated the woman he thought he'd broken. But the truth, he hadn't even begun to see what Layla was capable of. The conference room on the 18th floor of the Hawthorne building was all sleek glass, brushed chrome, and quiet tension. Layla sat at one end of the long oak table beside Cassandra, who had her briefcase open and organized like a weapon of war. Across from them sat Jonah, visibly jittery, his tie, askew fingers drumming on the wood. Riley perched beside him, flawless as ever in a fitted cream blazer. Her legs-crossed lips painted a defiant red. The room smelled faintly of citrus and unease. Thank you both for being here. Cassandra began, her voice crisp and controlled. Today's meeting is to review asset division finalized divorce proceedings and address several developments relevant to both parties. Jonah leaned forward, trying to reclaim his confidence. We're prepared to settle. No need to draw this out. Layla said nothing. She was dressed simply in navy blue. Her posture relaxed, her expression unreadable. Cassandra nodded toward the door. Of course. But before we proceed, there are a few disclosures we believe are essential. The door opened again. Allison entered first, holding a thick envelope followed by a gray-haired woman in her mid-60s, dressed in a modest cardigan and slacks. Riley's eyes went wide. Her face drained of color. "Aunt Marianne," she gasped. Marianne didn't answer. She walked directly to the seat beside Layla and set down her purse. Her gaze toward her niece was steady, but tired. Cassandra opened the envelope and began laying out photographs on the table, sliding them across to Jonah. "This," she said smoothly, "is Riley at the Eastgate Hotel with Dr. Michael Chen. This was taken 3 nights after she claimed to be visiting her mother. Here she is again, 3 days later at Bar Zenith with another man." Jonah's hands trembled as he picked up the pictures, his jaw tensed. "And here," Cassandra continued, pulling out another document, "is a signed statement from Ms. Marianne Donovan. She confirms that her niece Riley previously attempted to coerce a man into marriage by falsifying a pregnancy." Riley stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous. Their photo's not proof of anything. And my aunt, she's just bitter. She's always judged me. Marianne didn't rise to the bait." Her voice was quiet but firm. "Riley, I stayed silent when you lied, cheated, and manipulated people. But not this time. You can't keep hurting others and expect no consequences." Jonah stared at Riley, his face pale and drawn. "Is it true?" he asked. Riley crossed her arms, chin lifted, but her voice faltered. It wasn't like that. I just thought you had your life together. I thought you could take care of me. I was tired of starting over." "You lied to me," Jonah whispered. "You used me." "I used what I had." Riley snapped, her defenses crumbling. "I wanted stability." So what? Jonah pushed the photos away like they burned. His shoulders sank. "I destroyed my marriage for this." Layla finally spoke, her voice clear and controlled. "No, Jonah. You destroyed it long before Riley ever showed up. You just needed someone else to blame." The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. Cassandra slid the final set of divorce papers across the table. "We're prepared to finalize the agreement now, unless Mr. Hayes intends to contest." Jonah shook his head slowly. "No, I'll sign." He took the pen with a hand that no longer shook from arrogance, but from regret. Each stroke of ink on the page echoed through the room like a verdict. When it was done, he set the pen down and looked at Layla, not pleading, not angry, just broken. "I was wrong," he muttered. Layla didn't flinch. "Yes, you were." And with that, the meeting ended. Riley fled without another word. Marianne gave Layla a warm nod before following her. Jonah remained seated hollow and quiet. But Layla stood with the grace of someone who had already moved on. The chapter was closed, the damage done, and the power finally restored to where it belonged. News spread fast in Jonah's world, especially when it was bad. Just 3 days after the legal showdown word leaked from his office, that company funds had been traced to unauthorized expenses. A junior associate had found discrepancies in expense reports. High-end dinners, luxury hotel bookings, all disguised as client meetings. The numbers didn't lie, nor did the photos now circulating quietly among the firm's partners. Jonah was called in for an emergency ethics review. Within hours, he was placed on unpaid leave. By the end of the week, he was terminated for violating company policy. His ID card deactivated, inbox wiped clean, and name erased from the website. Just like that, the man who once prided himself on being the image of ambition was boxed up and escorted out of the building like a cautionary tale. He returned to his apartment, only to find an eviction notice taped to the door. His landlord, alerted by Jonah's sudden job loss and missed rent, wasn't about to take risks. The upscale unit once paid for partially, with Layla's silent sacrifices, now stood empty, its polished floors echoing with the footsteps of a man who no longer belonged there. He packed what little he could carry and drove east to Spokane, hoping to find refuge with his parents. But refuge came with terms. His father, a retired naval officer, barely spoke during dinner. His mother, usually warm, kept her arms crossed. When Jonah finally explained everything, including the court order requiring restitution to Layla for misused funds, the silence became unbearable. His father walked to the kitchen and returned with a folder. "We're pulling out of the loan cosign," he said flatly. "We don't support fraud, intentional or not. Handle your own mess." Jonah didn't argue. He just nodded, the weight of shame carving deeper into his shoulders. As for Riley, her fall was quieter, but no less steep. Her Aunt Marianne had wasted no time contacting Riley's mother, an elementary school teacher, known for her strict principles and no-nonsense parenting. Within days, Riley was pulled from the college program her family had been bankrolling. Her credit cards were canceled, her lease terminated. She was sent to live with relatives in rural Idaho, where she now worked full shifts at the family bakery. Up at 4 a.m., kneading dough and serving muffins to retirees who had no idea she once wore designer heels and smiled her way into men's lives like it was sport. Her paychecks were docked for court-mandated repayments. Every dollar earned, every hour worked, went toward cleaning up the wreckage she had left behind. Layla, meanwhile, was settling into her temporary apartment. It wasn't grand, just 2 bedrooms, sunlit windows, and floors that didn't creak when you walked barefoot in the early morning. She bought a new set of kitchenware and filled the pantry with things Jonah used to call unnecessary luxury: artisanal tea, imported olive oil, handmade ceramic mugs. But what she treasured most was the silence. Not the silence of being ignored, the silence of peace. She no longer checked her phone for Jonah's calls. She didn't watch the door. She didn't scan crowds for familiar profiles. She lived her days freely, morning walks, with the stroller, midday journaling, cooking meals that no one criticized. Her body was still healing, but her spirit had never been stronger. For the first time in years, Layla woke up with no need to shrink herself for someone else's comfort. She smiled at her reflection, not because it was flawless, but because it was hers again. The world she once tiptoed through now felt wide open. She wasn't just free. She was finally her own. The town of Willow Ridge sat quiet under a canopy of pine and cedar, nestled between the slopes of the Oregon Highlands and the still waters of Crescent Lake. The air smelled of wet moss and wildflowers. Layla had only meant to visit for a few days, but when she stood on the wraparound porch of the weathered 2-story farmhouse with its white shutters and lilac bushes, something settled inside her. This is where I begin again. She bought the place within a week. No negotiation, no hesitation. A portion of her inheritance covered the cost in full. It wasn't just a home. It was a declaration. Her best friend Allison, ever faithful and full of charm, moved in that same month. You cook, I sweep. You make tea, I pour the wine, she teased, dragging boxes up the steps with a grin. They weren't a couple, but they were everything a peaceful partnership should be: respectful, easy, full of gentle laughter, and quiet company. They painted the walls themselves white with soft earth tones. Layla chose every detail down to the brass cabinet knobs and linen curtains. The garden bloomed under her care, each tomato vine and lavender stalk, a quiet reminder of how life, when nurtured, always finds a way to thrive again. She started a blog titled Still Standing, where she wrote candidly about starting over after betrayal, about financial empowerment, motherhood, and rediscovering self-worth. The readership grew quickly. Women messaged her from all over the country. Some divorced others, still stuck in silence, many just looking for permission to believe they were enough. "You say things I haven't had the courage to admit to myself," one reader wrote. Layla responded personally to every message. She didn't want fame. She wanted to hold space for others and for herself. Each morning began with coffee on the porch and ended with music humming through the old house, as she cooked meals she actually enjoyed. Allison would light candles in the living room, and together they'd watch indie films, or simply sit in silence without expectation. For the first time in decades, there was no fear of someone slamming the door or walking out without a word. No hunger for approval, no shrinking to keep the peace. Then one Friday morning, the past showed up at her door. She opened it to find Jonah disheveled hair, unkempt, wearing the same cologne she'd long stopped associating with comfort. In his hands, a bouquet of yellow tulips, the kind she once adored before everything went sour. "Layla," he said softly, "I know I messed up. I see it now. I lost everything. But maybe we could talk. Start over." She looked at him for a long moment, not with anger, not even sadness, just clarity. "Start over?" she asked gently. "You mean go back to the years I spent making myself smaller so you could feel big? Or the nights I cried in the kitchen while you were working late?" He blinked. "People change. I did," she said simply. "I changed." She stepped outside, pulling the door halfway shut behind her. "I found something here, Jonah. Not just peace. I found myself. And I'm not going back, not for apologies, not for regret, not for a bouquet of old memories." She didn't slam the door. She didn't need to. She closed it with the calm strength of a woman who had nothing left to prove. Later that night, Allison brought out 2 glasses of wine. They sat on the porch legs wrapped in knit blankets, watching the stars blink awake. "You okay?" she asked. Layla smiled. "I'm more than okay. I'm free." And as the wind rustled the trees and the scent of jasmine drifted from the garden, Layla knew she'd finally built a life no one could take from her. Not because it was perfect, but because it was hers completely, fully, and unapologetically hers.